Hi, this is Jessica McAtee from My Enneagram Life Coach, and today we are going to finish up the third video in the growth paths videos that we started a few weeks ago. So if you are interested in growth paths for numbers 3, 6, 9, or for numbers 1, 7, or 5, this is not the video you want. Go back and watch one of the other ones. Today we're going to talk about growth paths for types 8, 2, and 4. And that will finish up this and we'll move on to other things. Okay, so where we left off last video was Enneagram Type 5s. Their growth path, one way. In other words, what we're saying is one way out of the ruts that you currently get stuck in is to follow the Enneagram map of personality where they say your growth path is. And not every Enneagram teacher will agree that growth paths are used in the same way. And maybe they're right. But to me, at least, giving you one way to do things differently is helpful than giving you no ways. So we're not saying this is the only way you could ever grow, but we're saying, here's a way that's very different from your current come from. And if you can start learning to change your behaviors a little bit more in this direction, then you could get some different responses. There's a theory called free trait theory. A guy named Brian Little has a book on it and around it, and he's not the only one that talks about this, but it's this idea that it's kind of the same idea that I'm using here with Enneagram teaching, which is that, yes, we have temperamental come-froms, we have an Enneagram speak, we have an Enneagram type, but we can learn to expand ourselves to other ways of being, or in other words, to look like to show up in different ways. So free trait theory is sometimes described like a rubber band, right? You can stretch a rubber band to a point. Now, if you let it go, it'll snap back to its original size and shape. But in certain circumstances in life, you might notice that your current come from or your habitual come from isn't helping. And so you can try out a toolbox of another personality type. And that's what Enneagram growth paths help us to do. They're not the end all be all. They're not the only way to grow, but it's a really good start if you want just some direction to move into. Okay, so 5s move to 8s. We talked about type 8s. My name for them is daring protectors. These are the boldest types of humans on the planet. They are individualistic, very self-confident. In fact, 8s are probably the Enneagram personality type that experience self-doubt the least. They sincerely, genuinely, almost never experience self-doubt. It's pretty amazing. They get a lot of flack for that too, I might add. I actually think it's mostly because of jealousy, because so many other types wrestle and struggle with self-doubt that they're almost offended that some people don't have self-doubt. And in defense of our 8 friends, I would say they didn't ask for that. That's just the way they showed up on the planet. So kudos to them for being so brave and full of gusto in a way that the rest of us don't do. So they're very self-confident, very assertive. Really, they would score very high if you move into the big 5, they are high in extroversion, very altruistic, very resourceful, very maximizing, meaning 8s are in the habit of seeing a person or a situation or a business or a home or anything and seeing its potential and then trying to work to develop its potential. So maximizing the potential out of all things. That's where an 8's attention is all the time. They're very much straight shooters. 8s don't beat around the bush. They tell you what they think. They're very strong-willed and they're very inspiring. These are like the boldest of the bold types of people. When they walk into a room, you can feel their energy. Many people are intimidated by them. And for an 8, that is a little shocking because although an 8 can use intimidation as a weapon, I guess I would say. But a lot of times they're not trying to be intimidated. They're just intimidating. They're just showing up in their natural way. And because they're so forthright and bold and tell it like it is, other types of people who are not like that become intimidated almost instantly. When they are not at their best, eights can get very impulsive and very controlling, particularly of people. Eights, their biggest fear is to show vulnerability or to be taken advantage of. And so they're really hot about not letting anyone kind of boss them around, take away their rights, use power in a way that is not beneficial and helpful. They're constantly on the outlook for people who have some sort of power and authority and are not using it in what they deem to be constructive or helpful. So when they're at their lowest, they can be very vengeful, very confrontational, very self-serving, domineering, blunt, and unyielding. The unyielding thing too is just by definition because their personality structure is built on not being affected from the outside world. They're body types and they are very shielded and very protected, and they're not in the habit of listening to other people's inputs because they're so suspicious that the other people might be trying to take advantage of them. So they have had like a lifetime of blocking out anything other people have to say. And that can make them very unyielding. It can make them hard to get through to. I mean, literally, like saying a sentence to an 8 can be hard because sometimes they're just not listening. I don't know how else to say it other than they just can't hear you. And that can be very frustrating, especially to types that are good listeners who are thinking, why isn't this easy for you? Well, it's not easy for them. It's just because of how their personality is structured. So these typically highly extroverted people are very driven by their natural human impulses. Their physical body is what cues them in to how to show up in the world. So they have the biggest energy of any of the 9 types. They are very full of life. They just like from sun up to sundown, these people never stop working. They're not known for their relational skills. They're known for being very hard workers and doing really big things in the world. And I might add too, they get a lot of flack for that, but their contribution to the world is huge, big picture contributions. They might not send you, a little love note or something. They sometimes a little bit more out in the world than they are quiet, connecting, relational, but they do a lot for the world. A lot of inventors and world leaders end up being type 8. So they can live in a story that they are only valued for their protection, for the work that they give and perform, and for their resources. They have become so used to working that they tend to mistakenly think that the people in their lives, that's the only reason that we want them around. Of course, that's not true. We all have these false narratives that we live in. But because of that, 8s feel like they have to keep giving and performing and doing for the people around them. So for them, their growth path is to move to point 2. And you can see any of the numbers' growth paths by looking at the diagram drawing of the Enneagram, the circle with all the points going around. There are lines that radiate from each circle, from each point on the circle. And one of those lines is the growth path. So if you look at a type 8, you'll see a line to 2. That's the growth path. When an 8 moves into 2 space, they're moving from their body center at 8 into their heart center at 2. And they're very caring and warm, open and receptive. So here they can hear what other people have to say. They can actually connect instead of having that force field around them where they can't take any input from outside influences. At point 2, they're very affectionate and very merciful. They are sincerely concerned about others and heartfelt. And it's not that they're not concerned normally. It's just that they're so driven and they're so focused on their goals that that's where their focus goes, right? Our personality is formed by what we're paying attention to. And normally they're paying attention to the big things they're trying to discover, or their big inventions, or their big companies, or their big projects, or their big dreams. And in their minds, those big ideas will benefit the whole of humanity, but the forest kind of takes place over the trees, right? In this situation, they're looking more at big picture than small picture, and small picture here meaning connection. But they can reel it in. They can get down to a person-to-person level be very giving in huge ways. Okay, eights do everything big, including give. So they're very magnanimous. They often do acquire lots of resources because of their hard work, namely finances a lot of the time, but it doesn't have to be that. But with these big resources, they tend to give back in enormous ways when they're healthy and when they're on their growth path. They are self-sacrificing for the sake of others. They will lay down individual industry for cooperative efforts. Again, usually they're focused on being industrious towards their own goals, whatever those goals may be. But once they move to their two space, they start considering the other people who are closer to them and the other people that their decisions are affecting. And then they move into more of a cooperation space. And here they still make huge changes and do big work, but it's towards the collective, not just towards their individual desires. They soften enough to make emotional contact when they move to two, because usually eights are pretty hard and not emotional. That's the center that they don't tap into their emotions very often. The emotional center, it is said, for eights is the one least utilized. But when they move into their heart space on their growth path at two, here they start getting very soft and receptive to others, and then this is where they connect. Okay, so two, let's talk about twos. This is where eights move to in growth, and twos are called, my teachings call twos alluring givers. Alluring there because twos work very hard to attract people by their kindness, by their sweetness, by their charm, by their friendliness, by their smiles, by their nurturing. And giver, alluring giver, is because the twos are heart types. Okay, now we're back into the heart center. And for them, it feels like the way to get love is to give love first. Now, that's not true. And you can think about this by a little baby. Do you only love a baby if they love you first? No, that's nonsense. Like, do you only love a puppy if they love you first? No, a kitten? No, they're adorbs, right? You love them anyway. So twos miss the memo on that, and it feels to them like the only way to be in relationship with somebody is to self-sacrifice for them repeatedly, habitually, and in really big and gregarious ways so that they can see it. So at their best, twos are actually, because they are the most relationship-focused type of person out of all 9 types, twos are putting relationships and connecting to others as their highest goal. And because of that, they end up being very giving, considerate, helpful, uplifting, hardworking, heartfelt, demonstrative, and altruistic. Hardworking there, twos are on the go. They're pretty busy, but they're usually on the go to, it's like what a two schedule is something like get up, make breakfast for their family, then go out to a nursing home and sing for the people in the nursing home, then go clean a shut-in's house, then go to the hospital and visit a friend, then bake cookies for the neighbors because, their grandma's sick. It's giving, go. It's like tons of energy towards other people. But what happens at the lowest end and the ouchy side of point 2 is they can believe that love is earned by giving, and they can place unrecognized expectations on others. So in other words, they come to live in a world where they don't mean to do this, but a lot of their giving has strings attached, and they're expecting other people to reciprocate and meet their needs. Now, twos don't voice their needs. Their vice is pride, and so they have a presentation of not needing things, but of course we all need things because we're all humans. And also, to our sweet twos, everybody in relationship with you who loves you knows you have needs, and we are more than happy to help you meet them. Just like you're happy to help us meet ours, right? It's not a one-way street. People who love us care about our needs. But twos, they have a distortion there, and it doesn't feel safe or comfortable to voice their own needs. So since childhood, they don't speak their needs. And in fact, they might not even know what they need because they've spent a lifetime not paying attention to that. And so then they can show up really possessive and resentful towards others. They can get upset that, they did XYZ for you and you didn't reciprocate that. They can have a false self-image because twos, it's not just that they work hard to be kind and loving and generous. They also work hard to only see themselves as kind and generous and giving. So they have this filter when they view themselves. They have an inability to see any part of their shadow side. And again, that's because they have a false message that if they are not 100% happy and joyful and bubbly and giving and cheerful, that people won't like them. That's not true. No reasonable person expects that of any other person. But in a two's world, they have to present that way. So the story they tell themselves is that, yeah, I'm only giving. No, I am really only giving and self-sacrificing and caring. I'm really that selfless. But in that, they have to create a false self to see themselves as only that way. They can tend towards codependency. And again, that's because they have spent so much time not noticing their own needs. They are hoping that others will meet those needs. And other people would actually probably be very happy to help them meet those needs. It's just we don't know what they are. And if the two doesn't voice them, we don't know. So twos are typically pretty extroverted, meaning they show a lot of positive emotion, at least, in public. That's how they present. They're very expressive. They're very complimentary. They're constantly telling you what's great about you and thanking you for things and encouraging you and asking you about what your interests are and really supporting you in that. Very expressive in an attempt to show others how much they love them and support them and how they're their special friend. And they can live in a narrative that the only way to be loved is to self-sacrifice. So, the big growth point for two is to move to point 4, which we're going to talk about in a second. But it's also the oxygen mask story. That little metaphor that you have to put on your own oxygen mask before you put it on those around you. That's like the piece that twos lose sight of. A 2, when she is growing, will notice that she has needs too. Notice that, I am kind of grumpy today, and that's okay. I feel grumpy. I'm okay. I'm human, and I'm not always smiles and giggles. Sometimes I'm mad. When a 2 moves to 4, she's very authentic about her own needs. 4s are very aware of themselves, and 4s are still in the heart space. So the growth point for 2 is in the heart space, and its growth path is also in heart space. And what that results in is a very emotionally centered type of person, meaning her skills and her faults are primarily in the heart space. So when 2s are really doing well, they move to 4 and they're able to name their own needs and put their oxygen mask on first and be authentic about that. 4s are not about putting on a mask or a fake smile if they don't really feel that way. And so for a 2 to move to 4 is to actually look at their own dark side and be emotionally aware of who they are. No longer telling themselves that story that, no, I'm only friendly, I'm only happy, I'm only cheerful. No, you know what? Sometimes I'm not. And today might be one of those days. They can start seeing the dark side of themselves along with the positive when they're at point 4. It's not that they don't have a lot of good attributes, because of course they do. 2s are wonderful. They're very loving and they really do want to connect and they really do care about people, but they are more sophisticated and more well-rounded and more truthful when they can start seeing that along with all those positive attributes, they do have some drawbacks and even some negative feelings. They can express their genuine feelings to themselves and to others. That's a huge growth point for 2, to be able to acknowledge his own pain and sadness and shortcomings and to voice that to another person. Confess your sins to each other that you may be healed, right? That's what's happening here with Enneagram when we're owning the places that were part of our shadow selves, owning the places that are in darkness. If you are filled with light with no dark corners, then your whole life will be radiant as though a floodlight is shining on you. So Enneagram is sort of, and I had somebody tell me this once on a call. She said, gosh, I feel like you just went into my soul and shone a flashlight again into like the cobwebs in the attic of my soul. She was a 4, by the way, very poetic, really beautiful metaphor, and a beautiful way of saying what we're saying is that Enneagram can help you take the light and shine it in these dark places and say, you know what, I'm going to clean out these cobwebs. So for 2s, expressing their feelings to themselves and to others, shining light on that, self-nurturing themselves first, taking care of their own needs, and understanding that they are so much more effective in nurturing others if they take care of themselves first. It is true that we have an obligation in some sense as a community of humans to take care of one another, but it is also true that we each have an individual responsibility to ourselves, because in a lot of ways, well, in every way, we are each mostly responsible for ourselves and how we show up. So to bless the world around us in a more complex and more beneficial way is to understand what we need and share that with God and get those needs met first before we go out into the world. So here, when a 2 moves to 4, she's way deeper engaged in the world beyond just surface flattery. When a 2 is not doing well, it's like the compliments are excessive, and it becomes so much that it becomes not believable, I guess. It's like they're so thankful and happy, and I don't know, sometimes it can seem fake, but not when they move to 4. Gosh, and I know so many 2s who do this so well and who are so generous and so loving and so helpful and so calm, and who don't feel that need anymore to do the constant flattery, but then who do offer support and flattery at appropriate times and in meaningful ways. And man, those are powerful 2s, that's for sure. Also, when the 2 moves to their 4 space, they are a little bit more in their head, into the thinking center. Because 2s, generally, like I mentioned, they're really good with heart space, and they're always on the go, going, which means their body space is inhabited as well, right? They're in their physical bodies, moving, doing. But what can be neglected in 2 space is thinking. What is mine to do? Is this mine to do? When they move to 4, 4s, even though they're also heart space, 4s are usually way more in the habit of thinking. 4s have a 5 wing. Number 5, which is the thinking center, is right next to 4s. So when a 2 moves into her 4 space, she can start thinking logically, what is mine to do? And also, she can be okay with stillness and solitude. A lot of times 2s can be dependent on, I mentioned they're really relationship centered, but sometimes they can start finding their identity in those relationships. However, 4s are a little bit more solitary. 4s are a little bit more comfortable with being alone and being with themselves. And so when a 2 moves into her healthy 4 space, she can really rest in being alone and not having to be connected at the hip with somebody at all times. Okay, and then let's go to 4 space. This is what I call the extraordinary romantics. Extraordinary here because 4s are in the heart center, and they have a deep desire to be themselves, to be authentically themselves. And it is true that all of us, when we are fully ourselves, are unique, because there are literally 8 billion unique people on this planet. That is true. Now, on the other hand, we can somewhat categorize people based on traits or Enneagram numbers or Myers-Briggs or Big 5 or whatever, but a 4 really leans into that extraordinary part of themselves. What differentiates them from the other 8 billion people? And romantic here, because I don't mean romantic in the love sense, like like relational, although that can be it too. But also fours are very dreamy. They're very poetic. They're very creative. They tend to live a little bit in a fantasy world in their own minds. They are a withdrawn type who tend to have these extraordinary fantasies about their, their fairy tale life and the creative and unique unicorn that they are. But they really are that. That is true. But they really lean into that. So at their best, fours are creative, usually high in trait openness, what we mean by that. Very self-aware. Remember, fours spend a huge amount of time, probably actually more than any of the other 8 types, thinking about themselves. Meaning like pondering themselves, sometimes maybe ruminating about themselves, but they are very, very introspective to an extreme. But because of that, they're very self-aware. They're aware of how people are receiving them. They're mindful of how they show up. They are very beauty-oriented. Again, very poetic, very noticing the lovely, and deep. Fours are very deep. On the Enneagram symbol, number 4 and 5 are at the bottom of the number. These are our deep types. Deep thinking at 5 and deep feeling at 4. So fours are our deep, deep feelers, very perceptive. They're primarily perceptive of themselves and their own emotions, though if they want to, they can also be perceptive of other people's. They're very reserved, empathetic, and sensitive. So fours, they are holding space for some of the harder emotions. It's easier for them, it's more comfortable for them to hold difficult emotions than it is most of the rest of us. So they're really in touch with their dark side. And at their lowest, they can get lost identifying with their melancholy emotions and their inner fantasy worlds. So, fours have a 5 wing, and it is said that fours are very connected to their deep emotions, and they're also very connected to their thoughts. So emotions and thoughts, they kind of live in this swirly world of emotions and thoughts. It can be hard for them to physically get embodied and get out into the world. So they're typically sort of withdrawn. They can be very dramatic. Mood swings can happen at 4. Very self-absorbed. I mentioned that before because they are putting so much attention on themselves. Very envious of other people. That's actually their vice, is envy. But when they look around at other people, it seems to a 4 that somehow the other people have some thing unnamed that the 4 doesn't have. And that makes the 4 feel envious. Now, maybe the 4 knows what it is. Maybe it's a job or a car or a woman or a lifestyle or a house or an art, gift of music or something. But they feel like they're missing something. And they can actually get sort of hateful. They can put themselves in the victim position, and they believe sometimes that their victimhood is somehow worse than that of others. So we have a lot of difficult thoughts and feelings going on at 4. A lot of sadness, a lot of despair, which can actually, again, be really good at connecting to others in sadness and despair. And it can also be very utilitarian towards making art and music. But if they get stuck there, then it becomes a problem. And all of us at times get stuck in our egos. And when the 4 gets stuck in their ego, which is our Enneagram number, then they literally get stuck in the sadness and in their fantasy worlds of how their life could be. They are typically highly introverted. Okay, this is not introverted here, meaning they do not regularly feel a lot of huge positive emotions, and it tends to make them withdraw. They're self-conscious. And they're typically pretty frustrated about the ideals that they have in their fantasy world and how that's not matching up with reality. That's very frustrating to them. So they're living in this victim story that they are fatally flawed and thus incapable of living life to the fullest, like it seems like everybody around them is. That's the experience of type 4. So for them, growth is moving back to 1. So now the 4 in the heart space, their growth point is to move to 1. And when a 4 moves to 1, he starts embodying energy, right? Because he was before just mostly in his mind and in his emotions. But now we actually get that gut center activated. And now he can have energy to do good out in the world. So instead of being withdrawn, he's going to move out into the world and do good. Good here, because remember, point 1 is our moralistic point. That's the part of us who has a really obvious moral compass and a really strong conscience that's telling us right from wrong. So sometimes the 4 can get stuck in ambiguity and stuck in sort of not having a clear North Star to go towards, right? But when they move to 1, it's clear what is the good move here. They can now discriminate between good and not helpful. 4s, in other words, 4s can get stuck in those feelings, and that's just not serving anyone. It's not serving them or the world. But if they ask their conscience, what would be the good thing for me to do right now? They very often can get the feeling of, you know what, let me go do something physically for the world around me, but then that will also benefit myself if I could get out of myself. Objectively engaging in situations to improve it. That's also a very 1 type activity, because 1s do their best to be reasonable and to set emotions aside to solve problems logically. So for a 4 to set his emotions aside, well, that's a big deal, because a lot of times the 4 is ruled by his emotions. So when he moves into his healthy 1 space, he can say, you know what, let me put my feelings aside and let me just look logically. What would be the best move to do here? Let me be objective as far as we can see objective, which by the way we can't, but let's me be as objective as I can be to try to improve this situation rather than just keep making myself a victim in it. Here he is active in change. The 4 actually goes out and is the change that she wants to see in the world, right? Rather than complaining and victimizing, go do the thing. Serving others regardless of how she feels. So 4s will often report not being able to get motivated to get moving because their emotions are too strong in any given day. 4s, more than any other type, will report waking up in the morning with really hard emotions, just first thing in the morning, not even over anything specifically. It's like a cloud just settles in on type 4s in the mornings and makes it very hard to get up and get moving. But when a 4 can get into her body space, her 1 space, her growth point, she can get out to serve others regardless of how she feels. Which is, by the way, how the most active types, that's exactly what they do too. It's not that we don't have feelings, and it's not that feelings aren't valid, and it's not that feelings don't have a message to deliver, because they do. However, to just stay in that space eternally is not helpful. The helpful way to process emotions is to feel the emotion, get the message from it, and then take that message and use that to heal the world. So finally, the 4 can act responsibly to care for himself and others. Notice others is coming up a lot here in the 4 growth point. And again, that's a contrast with how 4s are naturally. 4s tend to be more concerned about themselves. And again, that has its benefits, okay? Because they know themselves very well, better than most other types. Another cool thing about 4s is they often know they're 4s because they've spent so much time self-observing and self-reflecting. I mean, that's not all bad, but we don't want them getting stuck there. We want them to know who they are, know what their gifts are, and then use that to go bless the world and make the world a better place. And that's going to wrap up the growth path videos here. But I guess another thing I just want to point out with Enneagram is that the point of Enneagram is to notice our come from, notice which number is our dominant type, and then notice the habits and the stories and the behaviors that belong in that space. And then realize that that's not an objective view of reality. That is a subjective view based on our worldview. And that other humans are seeing the world differently. And you already know other people are seeing the world differently, and that's why your whole life you think everybody's crazy but you, right? Like that's not news. But to be able to identify, at least in part, what those ways, how we're different, and that's what Enneagram is attempting to do with the 9 different types, is really helpful, because then you realize, number one, people also have valid come-froms. But also, if you're honest with yourself, you notice you move into several of these other spaces too. And so it's like, oh yeah, I forgot. There's not just one way of looking at these things. And ultimately, with Enneagram work, what we want you to do is to have it so that you are no longer a slave to your Enneagram number. No longer the only way you know how to be is your core type. We are slaves to whatever controls us. And addiction is a manifestation of slavery. Financial debt is a manifestation of slavery. Habitual bad habits are manifestations of slavery. Overeating, we are slaves to all sorts of things. But if we can understand how we are a slave to our core personality type, we start shining light on that and realizing that when we are connected to Source, when we are connected to God, when we are connected to the universe, your higher power, whatever word works for you there, to goodness, let's say to ultimate goodness, we can be set free from these things that have been holding us hostage. And then you are free to live. You are free to live and move and have your life in real time, meaning when a situation arises, or when you're trying to make a decision, or when you're in a relationship and you're at an impasse, you can start saying, well, I know what my core type would have done. She would have done this, but you know what? I'm not that person anymore. I'm not only that person. I could respond like that. And there are benefits to responding in our original way. But you know what? I can shift out of that, and I can be a new creation. I can be somebody new. I don't have to always be who I was my whole life. In a sense, this is what they do in AA. Bill Wilson, when he wrote his Alcoholics Anonymous book, this is basically what he was doing. He's showing us you can embody a new identity. And of course, he does that through a higher power. The reason we do it through a higher power is because we absolutely know emphatically with science that people who believe that a higher power is guiding them and leading them literally live better lives, are healthier, have better relationships, and live longer. So if you can just shift yourself more to looking for goodness and to believing that goodness has you and goodness guides you, whether you turn to the right hand or to the left, the prophet says, your ears will hear a voice behind you saying, this is the way, walk in it. You can slow down in any situation and really say, wait, do I want to show up in my old Enneagram way, or do I want to show up in a new way? And ask goodness to guide you forward into a new way of being you. And it is so liberating. And then also, depending on our core type, we either have, we have some combination of fear issues, anger issues, and shame issues. And you can be set free from all of those. You do not have to be slave to those anymore. All right, brothers and sisters, you are free to follow goodness and break those old chains. And this is the final video in the Growth Paths series, and I will see you next week for another video. Thanks for watching.